Final presentation this afternoon is going to be Justice Jones, who serves as the Wildfire Mitigation Officer for the Austin Fire Department's Wildfire Division, where he has helped lead Austin and the surrounding area to embrace a wildfire preparedness and becoming rapidly fire adapted. Justice?
Okay, so why is a guy from the fire department here at the Ashe Juniper Symposium? That was a question. Maybe we can figure that out as we go through the discussion. I will preface this by saying this is probably the least technical presentation you're going to get during the next 2 days. Hopefully that's refreshing at the end of the day. A lot of great information. It's also good to see so many friendly faces out in the crowd. Hopefully that's still the case after the presentation. We'll see. Especially for my good friend Lisa, who asked me to be here. So I'm excited. I've learned a lot over the course of the day, and I'm excited to spend the next day with you tomorrow. And just sharing a little bit about one of the other species that occupies ecosystems that contain Ashe juniper, human beings. And they're probably one of the more impactful species to influence our landscape. And so I'm going to be focusing mostly on the human dynamics around Ashe juniper and how we can clarify how we can live compatibly with this species. But I need to really start with a little bit of background, a little history. For those of you who aren't steeped in wildfire, don't think about this all the time, a little bit of background might help. Many of you know that the majority of our fires are ignited by human beings. About 70% of those are caused by carelessness or individuals causing those fires. The majority of the people in Texas live in certain clustered areas, and so what we're seeing is because people are the carriers, primary carriers of fire on this earth, most of our fires are occurring within proximity to communities. That means they have the potential to threaten our communities. And so where people go, fire goes. And we keep that in mind as we move through the presentation. And Travis County is not immune from that fire occurrence. Majority of our fires are happening in the eastern crescents, where we have grass and our brushlands with a lot of fine fuels that easily ignite and spread quickly. But we do have fires across the county. It's important the conditions under which fires are occurring, that determines the outcome of these fires, but the potential is there. In 2022 and 2023, we had a total of 5,000 individual cause wildfires that fire departments responded to across the county. The majority of those were extinguished within that first operational period really quickly, which is part of the problem that we're facing today. The fire service has been really effective at suppressing the majority of the fires when they occur, because there's things in the way of those fires that we just can't allow them to unfold in the natural process yet. And so fire is certainly a major component of our ecosystem. I read a report that said Texas has the highest number of ecosystems adapted to fire of anywhere in the country because of our diversity across the state. The image on the bottom left is residual footprint of the Pinnacle fire from 2011. We're going to spend some time talking about this fire because it was a stand replacing fire in oak juniper woodlands, some areas predominantly closed canopy juniper. And for a little bit of context about Austin's wildfire risk, this is why the Austin and Travis County Wildfire Coalition exists. This is why the Austin Wildfire Division exists, because Austin has a significant potential for wildfire impacts. A recent report indicated that we have over 91,000 homes at high risk within the county. That's very substantial. If you look at the landscape across the country. I'm not going to compare us to other places, but we're holding our own when it comes to potential for wildfire risk. And Travis County is unique in the context of other counties in the state. Texas is 97% private land. I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know, but Austin and Travis County are a little bit different because we have so many areas set aside for conservation and land management. That's an asset for us who get to use and access these lands, but it creates an environment where we have a lot of wildlands that abut our human improvements, our communities, our built environment. In fact, we have over 567 linear miles of what's referred to as wildland-urban interface. And that's that area where homes meet or intermingle with our wildlands. And that's where we have the greatest potential for losses to occur and fire to spread into our communities. So I think that context is important. So is the fire environment that we live in. And we've heard a little bit about this throughout the day, but I want to speak specifically about how wildfires impact Central Texas. For many people, 2011 was the dawn of awareness that wildfire was even an issue for us. The state had wildfires, but somehow we, by and large, had dodged the bullet. In 2011, our luck ran out. What we saw is simultaneous starts across the landscape. So unlike our traditional model of mutual aid, where if there's just one house burning in the county, we can all show up and protect that house. When wildfires occur, all the fire departments have their hands full because it's happening across the landscape. So just be aware that we have limited potential under these extreme conditions. It doesn't take a big fire to cause major losses. Austin and Travis County have a community wildfire protection plan, and Dr. White with Baylor University led the modeling for that plan. And he effectively burned every square inch of burnable land in Austin and Travis County to see what those potential fire behavior outputs would be. And what that research indicated is we're not going to have a 100,000 acre contiguous fire. Our largest fire might be 5,000 acres, but it doesn't take a big fire to cause big losses. And that's what we saw in 2011, relatively small fires with large losses. And it's not just the fires that are occurring that we can respond to, it's that last fire that happens that we don't have resources to respond to that has the potential for impacts. As I mentioned, about 98% of wildfires are extinguished within the first operational period. The two that aren't are usually under extreme conditions, and so we're going to talk a little bit about the conditions that need to be present for extreme fire to happen in Austin and Travis County. But before we dive into it too much, I want to just touch on some of the myths that we hear when we're interacting with the public. Part of our job in the wildfire division is to talk people off fences. There's a lot of fear and apprehension about wildfire risk, and there's a tendency for people to want to take action to protect themselves, even if it means trespassing. And so a big part of our job is to myth bust, to help people understand how to mitigate wildfire risk correctly. So some of the things we hear are either that juniper is gasoline on a stick. How many's heard that one? Probably your favorite phrase. We've also heard it put that it's asbestos on a stick. And the reality is depending on conditions, both of those may seem true to you under given circumstances. But the reality is juniper is neither of those. It's a dynamic species, and it's only one indicator in our ecosystems of the potential for fire to occur and extreme fires to occur. Part of the demonization that's associated with juniper is because we measure the fuel moisture in that plant to determine what the dryness, overall dryness and receptivity to the whole ecosystem is for fire. So if a juniper has reached a threshold where it will burn, everything else in the ecosystem is likely to be as susceptible as well. So it's been an indicator, but it's also taken the brunt of the blame for being that indicator. And so it's a good tool for letting us know when we need to be extra cautious in these ecosystems. One of the myths is that juniper is more fire prone than other native species. A majority of the native species in Texas are fire adapted to some degree. They're not fire prone. They don't respond well to fire, as you've heard today. And so that's one of the myths that we deal with, that juniper are more prone to fire than other species. I participate in prescribed burns, and we have some of our burn managers here today. When we're doing these prescribed burns, very often oaks will torch out before we see juniper torching, and so it's just an indicator. Forests dominated by juniper should be thinned like western forests. I started my career out in western states, and the fuels treatment was big separation between the crowns of pine trees to keep fire from spreading to crown to crown. That's not the most appropriate treatment here in Austin. In fact, applying a inappropriate treatment can make fire much worse. We have developed custom fuel models throughout Travis County because the paucity of federal lands means we don't get a lot of research on our fuels and our fire behavior. And so it was necessary for us to delineate what our unique fuel types are. And the most volatile fuel type that we have in Austin and Travis County is called a graded juniper. And that's where we have isolated junipers with vast swaths of grass and other shrubs that can act to accelerate fire spread, that once it reaches those junipers, then those junipers can start torching and those embers can spread the fire as it moves. So a graded juniper is pretty susceptible to fire occurrence. It's got the recipe of fine flashy fuels and receptive heavier fuels. Where we don't see the potential for fire spread is in our closed canopy juniper woodlands under anything other than extreme conditions. And I'll talk about what those extreme conditions are. They're lined out in our Community Wildfire Protection Plan by Dr. White. And so essentially, these conditions only happen a few days a year. And that's the weather conditions. We also have to have alignment of the dryness of the juniper, the fuel moisture level, and topography. And so the recipe for a crown fire in juniper woodlands and to some degree in oak juniper woodlands, but less so, is you got to have 20 to 30 mile an hour winds. It's got to be aligned with the slopes, and fuel moistures have to be really low in the juniper for that to happen. That doesn't mean it can't happen, it just means the likelihood is very low. Unlike eastern Travis County, where as soon as we have our first hard freeze, fire departments are running grass fires. Those grass fires move quickly, slam into fences before firefighters can get there, and then we have cascading effects. So we can't take a Western approach to managing our ash juniper and our oak juniper woodlands. And we have to create realistic expectations of the outcome from a fire behavior standpoint. And so the truth is, stand replacing fires in juniper are rare under our current conditions, but things are changing, folks, and we have to recognize that as well. We can't base our actions on just the past anymore. And you can't you just burn your way out of the juniper problem? And the reality, any of our fire managers here can tell you, it's extremely difficult to get fire into a closed canopy juniper woodlands. You have to do it under conditions that are so close to the same conditions that result in catastrophic fire that really makes it not an option in a lot of areas, especially if you're surrounded by development. So let's talk about some of the myths associated, not just with juniper, but in trees in general, because this is more than just a juniper issue. It's a human understanding our ecosystem issue. So myth number one is it takes a big fire to cause major losses. That's not how it plays out in our fire environment. This is the Steiner Ranch fire. That is oak juniper woodlands that are burning. And you're seeing probably 40 to 50 foot flame lengths from torching of those juniper. On this fire, it was 125 acres, so compared to the fires we're seeing in the panhandle, this is a drop in the bucket. And again, it doesn't take big fires to cause major losses. For the folks in Steiner, losing 35 homes was catastrophic. The Pinnacle fire in southwest Austin, the Oak Hill area, this was a stand replacing closed canopy and oak juniper woodlands fires. The areas that had the diversity of oak and juniper fared a little bit better. But the reality is the conditions were so extreme that this fire carried through the crowns and spotted far into the communities. The picture here, as I move forward, is the stand replacing consequences. So very similar to what we see in Western fires. This is a potential for us and why we need to be so cautious when these extreme conditions arise. And part of that is so we can protect our juniper forest, because if we can guard them during these times of extreme fire potential, they're going to be good most of the rest of the year. And so it's really important. That's when fire prevention, fire safety, and helping the public understand the consequences of their behaviors come into play. Myth number two, my trees are out to get me. So this is a little bit fuzzy, but this is the Steiner Ranch fire, and what you're seeing is two structures that are burning, fully involved. This happened because the back fences caught on fire and embers gained access by and large to the structures, so they're burning from the inside out. What's a little bit hard to see is there's a tree between these two houses that's having a bad day. It's not the tree's fault that these houses are burning, it's the other way around, and we see this throughout fires across Texas. Almost every case study that the Texas A&M Forest Service has conducted highlights the fact that it's very often homes that are burning trees. This is the Steiner Ranch fire as well, and so what you're seeing is slabs of homes that were destroyed. What you're not seeing is a continuous crown fire. You're seeing a fire that spotted into this community, that ignited fences and decks and other combustible areas, spotted over homes and ignited areas across roads, and so a fire break wouldn't have stopped this fire. Embers were traveling well ahead of the fire. But what you see is the rows and rows of intact trees, and a lot of those are ash juniper. The ones that are toasted by the houses cooking the trees, and not necessarily the other way around. That's not to say a juniper burning next to a house is a good thing and can't impact it, but we want to base our decisions in reality, and so this is one of the realities is junipers aren't the boogeyman in this scenario. It was spot fires affecting this community by and large. So the big bad wolf can't blow my house down if I built it with bricks, right? So this is a JPEG, a small image of the Possum Kingdom fire. This home itself was all brick, a non-combustible roof and siding, very little vegetation around it. Embers made it into the gable vent and ignited the home from the inside. So this is the type of fire behavior that can be experienced in closed canopy juniper woodlands. This is the Possum Kingdom fire in 2011. This is what we're trying to protect our juniper forest from, so they can reach that stage of old growth, senescence, and be a stable resource for us and actually enhance our community's fire safety. But my opinion, my personal opinion, what we see with the disturbance, a lot of the fires that we've had in the area in the past is we have young juniper forests that we have to help, if we want to keep them intact, to reach that mature, more fire resilient stage. Because right now many of them are susceptible to fire, especially those in the brushier and shrubbier forms. So this is our potential and we can't ignore it. But again, this is very rare under extreme conditions, and so just be mindful of that. We don't show this picture to homeowners and the public. Just be aware. But what I will say is, how many of you think a home in the line of this fire would survive? Okay, so this is that same home with the fire bearing down on it. Again, this home had a metal roof, non-combustible siding. They had an area around the home of non-combustible zone of about 5 feet. That kept the surface fires from reaching the home. The metal roof and the non-combustible siding helped embers, prevent embers from landing and igniting the home. And so this is the home afterwards. So we know that homes can survive even under the most extreme conditions. Right down the road we have the Bastrop fire in 2011, and there was about 1,700 homes that were destroyed. In that same footprint, half as many homes survived, just about. And so that tells us that we can withstand wildfire if we're doing the right things. And so it's important to understand what those right things are. The main reasons across the board, and you can say this to homeowners and whoever needs to hear it, is embers are what's destroying the majority of our homes. Second cause is once that first rows of homes ignite, if they're close to each other, they start to create structure-to-structure ignition or an urban conflagration. That's what's really keeping us up at night. We're not worried about the forest fire. We've got good firefighters and fire managers can handle that. We're worried about that initiation of the conflagration. And so for us, these little wildfires are fuses for big fires that potentially impact a lot of our community. And the new science tells us it's the structure-to-structure ignition that we need to be most worried about. So we focus on trying to break that fuse and continuity of ignition, and we'll talk about that just a little bit more. Windows that aren't tempered don't resist breakage. They actually fracture at a temperature about 170 degrees. And so if it's 110 outside, how much more heat do you need to add to that to break a window? It's just a clump of pampas grass or flashy fuel makes the difference, and then embers have access to the home. And that's true with any vegetation planted in front of windows. Landscape to structure ignition is usually through surface fires versus crown fires. When fires move into urban areas, usually have a break in the continuity and species in the crown, and the fire almost always drops to the ground. You might have individual tree torching, but at that point it's usually an urban conflagration, and the trees that are being burned are often burned by the structures. And direct flame impingement, as we mentioned, that can take place in a number of forms, including your deck and fence. People are often worried about the live trees over their fence in the preserve or park. What about the dead trees that you have nailed to your house that are kiln dried? And so just kind of helping people have a context for risk and understanding that wildfire risk is really important. So let's talk about some of the realities of ash juniper. And I learned today I might be saying it wrong. Is it Ashe juniper? Either way, I'm sticking with ash juniper until somebody tells me otherwise. So the reality is closed canopy stands of juniper can be used as a fire break when the fuel moisture is high enough. And so one of the things the folks in the Texas A&M Forest Service train their firefighters on is when they can use a juniper break to stop a fire. and when that break might be vulnerable to fire. And so that's counterintuitive to most people. A lot of fires we experience in the state, we wait for it to hit that juniper break and drops down, and then we can fight it effectively. Juniper are highly sensitive to fire, especially the young multi-stem species. When we do prescribe burns, the juniper are very susceptible to being consumed. One thing that we have observed in the areas where we've gone in and pruned up juniper, and I'm not saying this is a good ecological practice, but from a fire behavior standpoint, those prescribed fires tend to go right under the juniper and keep going. And so it's really a matter of what type of fire behavior do we want on these landscapes, and how would we modify the landscape to maybe achieve multiple benefits. We do know that juniper is rebuilding the soil and increasing soil moisture, and that was one of the recommendations in the 2014 Community Wildfire Protection Plan, is that we find ways to reestablish the soil profile, especially in the western crescent of Travis County, because that soil moisture correlates to vegetative fuel moisture, and that fuel moisture correlates to susceptibility to burning, right? And so more soil means less susceptibility to our native species to burn. Wildfire and oak juniper and juniper woodlands are rare. And I mentioned this, the potential for a fire to happen in these woodlands. We haven't had major stand replacing fires like we saw at the Pinnacle Fire in Oak Hill since 2011. But we have had some fairly extreme fire conditions. And so that's not to say that it's not a potential concern, but the frequency is low in these areas. And when weather and fuel and topography and drought align, that's when we should be worried. That's when we should be focusing on prevention, removing potential ignition sources like we do here in Austin with some of our management strategies on our land. We know people are causing the fires, and so how do we remove that ignition source while still giving people, access to the land? Because it's only under these extreme conditions that we're going to experience the type of fire behavior that we want to avoid for our juniper ecosystems and for our communities. So just a few closing thoughts. The Texas fire cycle was disrupted long before European settlement by disease and other impacts, and so I don't know that we really have a solid understanding of what should be. I think it's dynamic, and we should start focusing on what we want that ecosystem to function as, especially adjacent to communities. So you may have heard the term shaded fuel breaks. That's a practice that U.S. Fish and Wildlife has developed a best practice for, and that the city and county has adopted. And essentially, we're trying to reduce the fire intensity at the intersection of these oak juniper woodlands and our homes and our communities, and mimic what Elizabeth mentioned, the form of these old growth juniper stands, to give them a chance to continue to flourish. There's challenges with conducting fuels mitigation in oak juniper woodlands. There's been very few opportunities to test this type of treatment. Our intuition tells us less material in these zones would equal less intensity, but by and large we haven't been tested by fire, and I'm happy with that. But someday we may, and we may have to adjust course based on what we learn. Shade is certainly our friend when it comes to wildfire in Austin, Central Texas, and that's not a given everywhere. And so for us, that's going to increase the ambient humidity, it's going to lower surface temperatures, and it's going to reduce the growth of fine, flashy fuels, grass and other material that cause fires to spread quickly. And so we promote shaded fuel breaks, we promote canopy cover within the city of Austin, but we also promote that you have adequate defensible space and appropriate landscaping to protect your home. The greatest threat to juniper, from my estimation, is misperceptions from the public. As I mentioned, it's easy to demonize juniper. It's capable of intense fire behavior, but so is the rest of our ecosystem. So how do we adjust people's perception so they can live and cohabitate with oak juniper and juniper woodlands that we exist in? And a lot of that for us is just ensuring that they understand the steps that they can take to protect their property and feel less concerned about the live trees by addressing the dead stuff that they've attached to their home. But also we can prune and manage vegetation in a way that can make it less susceptible to fire. And so if you're going to have a juniper in your yard, and a lot of people want the value of that shade and the habitat, don't plant a bunch of stuff, ladder fuel under it, and a fire's not going to get in the crown of that tree, and you're not going to have as many concerns. And so we can live compatibly with juniper. We just have to understand how to educate the public to share that vision with us. And that means each of and every one of us understanding how homes burn, because they're cutting junipers down because they're worried about their homes. And so if we can help them understand how to be more effective in reducing their potential for home ignition, we can help give our ecosystems a chance to become more resilient over time. So with that, thank you. Yeah, sorry about that jargon. Typically, an operational period is a 24-hour period. It can vary depending on the incident, but usually a 12 to 24-hour period. Thank you.